Hello everyone, it's Shannon here. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, we are going to do some very easy inlay die cutting and combine it with some ink blended panels to really make some fun and vibrant retirement cards. So here's the finished card. I wanted to hold it up to the camera so you could get a good look at that beautiful ink blended panel that we did some inlay die cutting with. And I also wanted to point out that we have a really cool kind of feature on this card. We use acetate on this card to kind of create like a invisible front panel or front part of your card, and it perfectly hides the sentiment in the inside as well. So it's kind of a fun surprise and a great reveal and very easy to do. So for today's cards, we're going to use some nesting dies. Waffle Flower has 3 new nesting dies sets. The first is the nesting circle, the nesting oval, and the nesting squares. These die sets are so wonderful. You get so many dies in a set, and they're just really versatile, very functional dies to have around. I used the largest die from the square set here to cut 3 squares out of 110-pound white cardstock, and I'm going to do some ink blending on one of the squares. I'm going to use Distress Oxides for my ink blending today. These inks blend beautifully, very easy to work with. I'm going to start with Faded Jeans, and I'm going to actually blend the opposite corners of this square. So I just blended a little portion of one corner, and now I flipped it around and blended the other corner with Faded Jeans. Now I'm going to move on to Peacock Feathers, and I'm going to blend right next to that Faded Jeans. The very center of this square at a diagonal obviously is going to be Twisted Citron. So that's going to be the very center. So after I blended the Peacock Feathers, I'm now going to move on to Twisted Citron. This just makes a really cool pattern when we do the inlay die cutting, so that's why I chose this diagonal kind of gradation. This is a little bit better than just doing like top down from the square, 2 colors. You're going to get a more interesting look. And I only know this because I've played around with this technique a lot. This is actually one of my favorite kind of techniques to do because it's really simple but has a big wow factor. And what I'm doing right now is just going back through my colors, kind of smoothing out the transition between one and the next. And I'm almost done here. I'm just going to finish up with a little bit more of that Faded Jeans. And now I have my ink blended panel done and ready to die cut. So I already used that largest square to actually cut this square out. So now I'm going to skip that next square die and grab the next one. And I'm going to repeat this pattern, skip one, grab the next one, skip one, grab the next one, until I get all the way down to the very center. Now I'm going to grab a die here, and I'm going to grab 3 of them. I only like to cut 3 at a time, and just position them on my panel, grab a couple pieces of micro pour tape to hold these dies in place, and then I will run this through my die cutting machine. So while I'm die cutting this, I do want to talk a little bit more about how I ink blended this panel. So I did do a gradation at a diagonal. I did this because I know that when I'm going to get a lot of contrast when I do my inlay die cutting, and contrast is what I'm really looking for, because contrast is going to make this more interesting and just make it really kind of have a lot of energy. And you'll see that in a few seconds when I move on to the inlay die cutting. And also, I don't want to discourage you from trying other different ink blended kind of panels and seeing what you get with this technique. I think the results are going to be really cool pretty much no matter what you do. So definitely try different things out and kind of, experiment, have fun with this technique. So now that I've die cut this whole square with my square dies, I'm now going to move on to my second square panel that I cut. Remember, we cut 3 in the very beginning, and I'm going to completely cover this with my adhesive. And then the first square I'm going to grab is the largest and just position it here onto my large die cut square with all the adhesive, and then I'll grab my next one. Now I'm not going to do this in the order that I actually ink blended. I'm going to rotate this second square around, and by doing that and inlaying it in here in the largest one, it creates a lot of contrast, because right now I have next to the Faded Jeans, I have Twisted Citron instead of Faded Jeans next to Faded Jeans. It just creates a lot of energy and a lot of contrast, and it's just really cool and super simple. I bet when you first saw this panel, you probably thought I kind of mixed 2 die cuts together, but nope, it's just one die cut that we did some ink blending, and just by rotating our die cuts, we get a really cool look. And I do this technique a lot. I think it's a lot of fun. So now moving on to my sentiment, I'm going to grab this Happy Retirement and just stamp it in VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and then I'm going to grab the matching die and die cut this out. The sentiment is from the Happy Retirement stamp set, and I used the matching die, obviously, to die cut the sentiment. Now I'm going to move on to an A2 panel of white cardstock. This panel is actually going to be the inside of my card. I'm going to grab another sentiment from that Happy Retirement stamp set, center it here, and then I'm going to grab my blended panel and just make sure that that sentiment is going to be easily covered by that panel, and it is. That large square is very big and easily can cover that that sentiment. Then I'll just ink it up in VersaFine Onyx Black ink and stamp it. Now I'm going to move on to the second part of my sentiment. This says "You made it." I'm going to do some heat embossing, so I put down some anti-static powder, inked up my sentiment in Versamark ink, put on some white embossing powder, and now I'm heat setting that, and I will trim that down to make a strip. So here are all my sentiment parts. Happy Retirement and "You made it" will be on the front, and of course the "Wishing You" is going to be on the inside of my card. So now I have an 8.5 by 5.5 panel of acetate, and I'm now going to score it at 4.25. Now this is if you notice a little score line in there, that's just because I started scoring before I had actually turned on the camera. And after I've scored it, I'm now going to fold it over and kind of crease it down. Now I do want to note that this acetate is actually a projector sheet. You know, those overhead projectors that our teachers used when we were in school? Well, that's what this is. It's a little thinner, but it's a lot cheaper and worked really well for this card. So definitely a great option or a cheaper option for acetate. So pretty cool, great for shaker cards obviously as well. So now I'm going to take this A2 pencil that I stamped my inside sentiment on, and I'm going to glue it onto the acetate. So I'm going to flip this over, and you notice there's some grid marks on my white sheet. This is a scrap piece of paper. It's a kind of a misprint monthly calendar page that Waffle Flower sells, and it couldn't be sold obviously, so that's why I'm using it, but it's some really nice cardstock. But after I've added some glue to the back side of this panel, I'm going to nestle it inside my acetate card, essentially, fold it over, and then press that down. And obviously you're going to see all the glue here because acetate's clear. To cover that, I have another A2 panel of white cardstock here that I'm going to place right on the back side. The nice thing about this is it hides all the glue, but it also gives you a great spot to stamp your handmade by stamp on the back of your card, like card makers typically like to do. So now that I've got that portion of my card done, kind of my inside, I'm now ready to work on the front of my card. So I'm kind of figuring out how this square panel needs to go so it covers up the sentiment on the inside. So I figured out how I want it positioned. Then I'll flip it over, grab my pencil here, kind of trace it along the edge, and then I'll go ahead and cut that with my paper trimmer. Now I need to do the exact same thing to my third and final square that I cut in the middle. Just kind of line the two together and then trace along that cut edge with the pencil, and then I went ahead and trimmed that third square as well. So we are almost ready to wrap this card up. I'm going to grab my card again, and then I'm going to glue the ink blended inlay square directly on the front of my acetate card here. So I got some liquid glue, and the glue I'm using is Tombow Mono Multi-Liquid Adhesive. I really like this glue a lot. And once I stick that down, I'll then open my card up, and again, to hide the glue, I'm going to glue another panel here, or that square, that third square that we die cut in the very beginning and then trimmed. That's going to go on the back side of our inlay die cut panel. So again, using my liquid glue and then just sticking it right down, and that will complete the card almost. All we have to do now is the sentiment. So I've got to take the Happy Retirement. Now I made a little mistake here. I was starting to glue here in this, so I wiped it off. As you can see, that Happy Retirement kind of hangs, or the place I want to place it anyways, kind of hangs off of the inlaid ink blended panel. So you don't want to put any glue on that little portion that's going to hang off of the inlaid die cut square on the front. That's just because that glue is going to be visible through on the acetate, so you don't want to do that. And just be mindful of that too, also for that sentiment strip as well. So I only got glue kind of right behind you and made, and left the it part of it, no adhesive or no glue, so you don't see any glue when you open up this card. And once I get those stuck down, my card is done. And now I'll hold this card up to the camera so you can get a good look at the details. I love the acetate component of this card. I think it's kind of a fun surprise, and I have so much fun every time I play with this inlay die cutting technique and the ink blended panels. I just think it's so cool. Here's a circle one that I did with the circle nesting dies. I used Seedless Preserves, Barn Door, and Mustard Seed Distress Oxides on this one, and blended it basically the same way that I blended the square. I had the Seedless Preserves on the outside, then next to that was the Barn Door, and then the very center was Mustard Seed. Now this was actually a rainbow, so I used picked raspberry, spice marmalade, mustard seed, lucky clover, salty ocean, and a little bit of wilted violet. And it's such a neat look. I think if I didn't know this was a rainbow, I never would have guessed that this was an ink blended oval rainbow before I did inlay die cutting. And I think it has a really fun look as well. So I definitely encourage you to try out and experiment different ink blended panels with this technique. I think you'll be really surprised by the results. I hope you guys enjoyed today's cards and video. If you want any more information on the products I used, please check out the links below in my description. And if you like this video, I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel. You can also check me out on Instagram or check out my blog as well. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.